been talking about debates in the digital humanities, and as I've been doing it lately, I've been sort of trying to tell the origin story of the book itself, because I think it is a nice way, in some sense, of explaining what the digital humanities is. And in my experience, there are many people who have heard the term. It's certainly out there in the academic ether, and but don't really know what it means, what it implies. And so I've been trying to do a little bit of this kind of story of the book's composition, because it has an interesting one. So the first thing that I just want to point out is that this book has a hashtag. And I point that out for a couple of reasons. Right, yeah, of course. But
because it's really cute.
But I'll be talking maybe a little bit later about what this actually means. Oh, hey!
Hey,
Come in. Okay, all right. Okay, all right.
Come in. I'll move around.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Actually, why don't we pause a moment?
Sorry. Oh, there's plenty of chairs. Yeah, that's it. I'm going to open the bottle so people can help themselves, so they don't feel shy. There.
It's just in case.
Oh, thank you.
Others come.
I'm sure Charlie will want to.
Yeah.
Please help us understand.
If it's not too much of a position, if I could just ask you to speak a tiny bit louder. Just,
Louder?
You're next to the fan, and the fan is chopping up your
We can also
voice.
turn the fan off if...
I don't want to
you.
impose.
I'm okay if it's
It's up to you guys.
Are you?
We can,
Is it?
if it gets too warm, we can turn it back on, but
Okay.
there we go.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So I'll just, I guess, pick up where I left off. So I was explaining that this is a book that has a hashtag, and that I think that's not an insignificant thing for this book, or for any book these days. But I'll be explaining more soon about why that's so. So this book is meant to really take account of what I see as, and I'm not alone in this, obviously, is seeing as being the kind of DH moment, right? This moment when this term, the digital humanities, seems to have sprung fully formed into the news, where we have New York Times articles about it. We have huge grants being given out by companies like Google. We have the NEH devoting an entire office to the digital humanities. And yet, a lot of the conversation around the digital humanities is taking place, or has been taking place, in networked environments that aren't especially sustainable. One of the main networks for digital humanists is Twitter. And in fact, I was giving a presentation maybe 3 or 4 years ago to graduate students, and I asked them, where is the scholarly conversation happening in your field? And for most of the students, it was in the academic journals of my special area of specialization. And my answer for digital humanities really was Twitter. That's where not all digital humanists are there, but if you want to know what's happening right now in the digital humanities, really the place to be right now is Twitter, because there is this collection of people there constantly sharing links out to articles, to blog posts, and there's an ongoing conversation. And that's part of preserving that conversation and taking account of it, and taking account of this moment for the digital humanities, when we have enormous amounts of funding and going into it, many publications suddenly coming out. It seemed an important thing. I'll just sort of say very briefly, and I try to talk about this a little bit in the introduction, that the digital humanities as a field has a long history, and it has a lineage within the field of humanities computing. Before that, in a kind of computational linguistics and literary studies of stylometrics and various computational techniques for determining authorship and genre in text. So there's this kind of long history that, and then also goes back to textual scholarship and textual editing. But the thing is that when it became kind of branded as digital humanities, I think it has, its meaning as a field has shifted in very interesting ways. And so it was probably to take into account this moment that we began the book. So just very, very briefly, and I'll go over this a couple of kind of paradigmatic definitions of digital humanities. And one of the points being that there is no single definition of digital humanities that, of course, like any academic field, you ask what is American Studies, right? And you get the same kind of debates. But I think in some ways, it seems to me the debates around what is digital humanities are, if possible, even more fraught. So this is John Unsworth's definition. It's digital humanities is using computational tools to do the work of the humanities. So this is the kind of definition that says we are asking traditional humanistic questions of almost of traditional materials, but we are using digital tools. It's really the tools that are making the difference here. Here's another definition by Mark Marino at USC. He says, DH is a name that marks a moment of transition, a temporary epithet for what will eventually be called merely humanities. And this is very much a motif in definitions of digital humanities, that people who are arguing that what we now know as digital humanities, this DH moment, is a transitional one. It's transitional because it's new, and eventually all humanities will be digital humanities, and then we won't need the prefix anymore. There are other definitions. Matthew Kirschenbaum, a very well-known digital humanist at Maryland, whose book Mechanisms I recommend very highly, about the materiality of new media, writes that digital humanities is a term of tactical convenience. And here there are many valences to this definition. He means both within institutions, the phrase, the name, the label digital humanities is something that literally can, help get things done in the university, can get funding for speaker series, help create lines, tenure track lines, etc. That in this moment, this is a kind of pragmatic definition of the digital humanities, although I think he means it in more than simply a pragmatic sense, that it's tactical in a couple of different ways, and one of the ways in which it's tactical is that it is being deployed by a shared community of digital humanists in a way that is simultaneously building out a networked community as it is in the process of forming itself. Jason Farman, also at Maryland, says it's both a methodology and a community. And I included this definition because I think the fact that it includes the DH community is very important. The DH community is oft discussed, and it's defined in a way that I think is somewhat unusual for a DH, for an academic field. There's a blog post that I included in the book called "Why Digital Humanities is Nice," and this is a post by Tom Scheinfeld of the Center for History and New Media, which argues that the sort of hands-on applied nature of much of digital humanities work and the collaborative nature of it requires, in some sense, what he calls a sort of niceness that is sometimes absent in our academic endeavors. So, and of course that has come under the DH community itself has come under tremendous pressure, especially I would say in the past half a year, as people have been pushing very hard on the digital humanities, on its relationship to cultural theory, and there's a sense in which DH is undergoing some of the turns that other fields went through in the 70s. So people are asking, well, why are we creating all these DH projects about Walt Whitman and William Blake, and what's a queer digital humanities? Where's race in the digital humanities? And that, in fact, those questions, in fact, are ones that this book foregrounds, and it's part of the reason that the book came into being, was to really give those critiques of the digital humanities as it stood force. So there are a couple of very important essays in the book that kind of make those points. There's a book called Why is the Digital Humanities So White? There's another book essay by Alan Liu called Where's Cultural Criticism in the Digital Humanities? So, DH itself is coming under pressure, and I think in some ways it's to be expected when you have what was perhaps previously a smaller community of kind of more like-minded scholars working on a more applied field. Suddenly we have this explosion of interest around the field, and it's now under pressure, and I think in ways that ultimately are productive. Finally, well, not finally, but just really quickly, Jeffrey Rockwell says it's the use of digital tools and methods in humanities study and dissemination. And the reason I include this definition is that it includes a sense of dissemination of scholarly work as an element of DH practice, which I think is very important. How we as scholars share our work and share our research with one another is a central part of what DH is about, grouped broadly under this term scholarly communication, which I think is one of the emerging and really important threads in DH work. Digital humanities is what digital humanists do, sort of tautological definition, but again, a sort of concentration on the community that I think is important. And then we have Amanda French saying, I'm sick of trying to define it. And here, we just have to say that the question, what is DH, has become a kind of trope. It's this question that is asked by newcomers to the field constantly, and DHers are, constantly trying to explain the field anew. So ultimately, I think one thing we can say here is that DH is unstable, right? So anyone who sort of discusses DH as a field that is settled, that has a kind of settled definition, I think is not being true to the reality, which is that it's really, in some ways, it's a field that has a distinct lineage, but that it's changed radically in recent years, and that has also really become a vague umbrella term for many, many different types of research. So just to go back for a second to DH debates, this might be a kind of typical modern scholarly process in the academy these days, that someone writes an essay or does a digital project of some kind. Maybe if that person happens to be a blogger, he or she will write a blog post about it. And maybe even if he or she is on Twitter, will tweet about, hey, I just published this new book, check it out, right? Something like that. In the digital humanities, one thing that we are starting to see is a kind of a closing of the circle, where tweets actually can lead to essays or books or digital projects. And there are many examples here of, within the field, of conversations that have happened in these networked environments like Twitter, leading to collaborations that have led to books, that have led to essays, and I think this is actually one of them. But the fact is that even this kind of conception of this sort of circle of scholarly conversation isn't really true to the reality, which is, I think, more of like I'm thinking of it as a networked ecology of scholarly communication, right? So that to think of tweets as being distinct from blog posts, as being distinct from books, as being distinct from articles and journals is not really true to the networked environment in which we find ourselves these days. And it's something that looks more, I think, like this, a sort of a cloud of crisscrossing and interstitial spaces that are overlap, and this is what I think of right now as being what the scholarly communications ecosystem looks like in the digital humanities, with much interchange between all of these forms. So the question is, when you have something like this, the question is, how can a book encompass that kind of moment? And I think also, should it? Do we need a book? Does a field like that exist in this kind of network space? And that depends in some ways on the affordances of digital platforms. Do we need a book? And the question that the publisher and I, we obviously felt yes. So, and there are several reasons which, I know that they seem completely obvious, but it's important to say, I think, that especially for a field that's premised on the digital environment, that there's a way in which a traditional paper-bound book can help legitimize or provide legibility to it, can help preserve the debates, and can also provide momentum and grounds for transformation. So these are some of the reasons why we did feel there was a need for the book. Now, the thing about this book that I have to say is that this is an edited volume with well, I have a slide here with the exact number of essays. I think it's something like 25 new essays, some republished blog posts, edited blog posts, and I think 4 republished essays that went from conception to publication in a single year.
Wow.
Okay, which is totally insane, right? I mean, we don't. This doesn't happen in the academy, really, and that's why I'm borrowing this sort of point here from my publisher, Doug Armato, who directs the University of Minnesota Press. When we presented about the book, and he sort of used the movie Christopher Nolan's Prestige, which is about 19th century magicians, and because for him, the fact that we did this book in a year, it could only be a conjuring trick, right? But what's beautiful about it is that they talk about in the movie the fact that, you know, a magic trick has 3 stages or parts. There's the pledge where the magician sort of presents himself to the audience, or presents something, says here's the rabbit, here's this thing, and the audience and the magician sort of engage in this moment of recognition and agreement. And then there's the turn where the rabbit disappears, and that's the audience oohs and ahs, and there's this, wow, what happened? But the trick is not complete until the prestige, until that stage where the thing that has been disappeared sort of is brought back whole and unharmed and back into itself. So we thought of this as well, I'll go back here for a second, but we thought that this was kind of appropriate for a networked field like the digital humanities, that to turn this field that is networked and digital in its very instantiation into a book, we needed to turn it into something else and then turn it back. And I'll talk about that turning back in just a little bit. So the pledge, and I'm just going to tell the story very quickly, but Doug and I met at the Old Town Bar, and sort of at this moment, he was asking me why is there so much debate around the digital humanities? I think the question he asked me, why are so many people upset by it? And I sort of listed a whole bunch of reasons, and we started talking, and he sort of said, do you think we could do something here, do a book? And I said, yes, that sounds exciting. And so we pledged together to have this book, and this, MLA 2011 was maybe a couple of weeks away, and we pledged to have this book done from one MLA to another, which obviously needed a strong pledge from both sides, from the editorial and production side. So gathering the community, there's a number 25 new essays, 20 revised blog posts and wiki pages, and the first thing I did was just kind of write to everyone, gather the community, and I won't linger too much here, but the main editorial work on the book was done from December, when I first sent out letters of inquiry to prospective contributors. First drafts that was in December. First drafts were due in March. We went through 3 stages of peer review, which I'll describe in a little more depth soon, and we wound up with finished pieces by July. And the publisher then went through all of its stages from approval, printing, basically it was sort of happening simultaneously, which was one of the odd things about the book from the production side, and editorial side, is that for the press, producing a book on this pace disrupted and actually reversed some of its usual methods, so that the director of the press was presenting this book to his editorial board kind of as it was being written, and it was passed on the sort of promise of its abstracts, and that this is really going to come through, and it's going to be peer reviewed and everything. And so it's again, this is where the conjuring trick happens. So in terms of transforming all this social media into the fixed form, we went through three stages of peer review. The first one I think is the most interesting. It was a semi-open peer-to-peer review. And this is where digital humanities as a field and as a field that's really rethinking what scholarly communication is invested in taking our traditions like peer review and subjecting them to some critical thought. And I don't know if anyone here has read Kathleen Fitzpatrick's Planned Obsolescence, which is a really wonderful exploration of the history of peer review and the ways in which networked and digital environments are changing them. But you know, her main point is that, or one of her main points is that we used to be in a situation where publishers held a sort of stranglehold on the act of publication, right? It was very hard to publish by oneself, and so that power now has been, you know, democratized or at least opened up, and anyone can publish anything. So the way she describes it is that given this new place in which we find ourselves, where scholars can have the ability to publish their work openly and even find greater audiences just by getting their work out there via a blog or via any way, we've reached a kind of a stage where post-publication review and community authorization becomes more important. And so that, in other words, it's often after a piece is published that the scholarly community around any field kind of determines whether or not the work is important. What she's also done, though, is she's been exploring what's called peer-to-peer review, which is a kind of more open review process. And this is what we use for DH debates. I basically took all of the draft essays, put them on a website using WordPress, the popular blogging platform, and a theme for WordPress called Comment Press. We set it up so that the text of each essay was on one side of the page, and then people could attach comments to any one of the paragraphs. So everyone who was involved in the book, all the contributors, were assigned another essay to review. And it was a private site, so if you weren't sort of involved in the book, you couldn't see it, but it was done openly within the community of writers. So what was interesting there was to see how the review process worked. One might think that a sort of open review and the fact that one's name might be attached to a comment could lead to sort of softer criticism. And in my experience, this did not really happen because we certainly had essays that didn't make it through the peer review process. We had people trenchant criticism of work throughout the process. But what was really interesting about it was that we had some authors going through the entire manuscript and offering comments to many others. And so what this created was its own little kind of network within the book in draft stage, and in fact debates within the debates. So these comments were sometimes, you know, we see in the footnotes messages from one author involved in volume to another. So the peer-to-peer review, it was a 2-week period with 30 essays at that time. 568 comments were left total, with an average of 20 comments per essay. So it was a significant moment for the book. After that, I just want to say that after that, we went through 2 other stages of review. One was my own review as editor of every essay, sending comments out to authors and requesting revisions. And then finally, the publisher itself did 2 blind reviews of the book in a more traditional form. There were limitations to this process and to producing a book in a year. You know, there are areas of the DH that we weren't able to cover. There were someone who had agreed to write an essay on one topic dropped out. I didn't have time to find someone else really. There's no index, there's no forward, and there was an accelerated copy editing schedule. I actually only learned this recently, that apparently the press spent what it spent on copy editing for this book is 6 times what it spends on its typical book. So it could have done 6 other books for this one. So this project could not have happened, at least in this form, without the publisher's commitment to it. So in one way in which we dealt with the fact that coverage was limited was to think about, well, I'll just say that at the beginning we thought, we can have people just write essays, but it feels like we're leaving out a central part of what DH is. Primarily the blogosphere around DH, where debates are happening all the time and people are writing really wonderful posts about various topics. So at first, the editor proposed we just sort of do one chapter of all blog posts, like what are the most important blog posts that have been published in the digital humanities. What we wound up doing was instead to sort of add blog posts at the end of every chapter and sort of use them to help bring out areas that we really hadn't been able to cover. And then we had these kind of meta moments like there's this is an image of an author who wrote a blog post about his course blogging that we included in the book. He blogged a post when the book came out that included a screenshot of the actual book that contains his blog post. It's like it's so many. So anyway, so there's that. This is another interesting thing that's in the book. What's here is on the left is a screenshot of Bethany Nowitzki's post. Bethany Nowitzki runs a scholars lab at the University of Virginia, which is one of the leading DH centers in the country and the world. And she had written a blog post called "What Do Girls Dig?" And this was in response to the NEH Office of Digital Humanities and NSF and other grant funding agencies had held a conference on digging into data, which was basically a conference in which the NEH had supported this competition and around big data and data mining. And Bethany sort of noted that all of the presenters were male. And so on Twitter, she sort of brought this up, and it led to this conversation. Everyone from Rosemary Fiel, the director of the MLA, weighing in, of course, the Office of Digital Humanities director is on Twitter, and he responded, and this whole conversation happened that included questions about, is there something even about the metaphor of sort of digging into data that is gendered in a problematic way? But what was important was that I think that this conversation actually happened, and I wanted to include in the book both for the fact that it's an example of the way in which gender is being brought into the digital humanities in really interesting ways, but also because of the medium here. So what Bethany did is she used a tool called Storyfy that allows one to sort of collect tweets and show them as they appeared in real time. And this is what they look like here, and this is what it looks like in the book. And I think the press did a really nice job of representing that conversation. So just to kind of give you an idea of what the structure of the book is, we have 6 sections that go from defining the digital humanities to theorizing and critiquing it, practicing it, teaching it, and envisioning the future of it. And I guess what I want to say about this is that the book is in a lot of ways meant, it is meant to sort of take a snapshot of this moment within DH and say what is the digital humanities right now, but it's not meant to be an uncritical snapshot. And I think the critiquing and theorizing sections especially contain essays that really take some shots at the digital humanities for various reasons. And so I'm happy with the way that the book both, I hope, represented what it is that digital humanities, what digital humanists do, what the digital humanities is, and also sort of future directions and critiques and showing where the field is headed. So the final thing I'll just say is that the book, that's sort of the turn, right? We took the digital humanities, this digital thing, and we turned it into this print-bound volume, but you'll remember that we haven't yet done the prestige. And that's what's kind of coming, is the book was premised when I contacted contributors on an open access volume, which is very much in line with DH as a field. Several of the core texts within DH are open access, available for free on the web. For instance, there are 2 volumes by Blackwell's that are very well known, Companion to Digital Humanities and Companion to Digital Literary Studies, completely free and on the web. And so we decided to do that for DH debates as well. what we're trying to do, so the question is, how do you take now this book and turn it back into the digital humanities proper? And one of the things we kind of realized is that doing an online edition of this book would not be actually turning the digital humanities back into itself. Digital humanities is a field, for instance, that now includes a journal of digital humanities that is based upon an instantiation known as DH Now, that takes algorithmically started out by analyzing a group of Twitter users who it identified or identified themselves as DHers, taking those links that they share and using that algorithmically to gain a sense of what's happening at the field at the time. So we have these kind of almost machine-led forms of discovery of DH work, and it seemed to just sort of take this text and throw up a bunch of PDFs on a website, which is kind of, I mean, I don't think I'm really exaggerating when I say that that has been the typical open access move. It's just you take your text and you put it on the web. And I don't mean to downplay that either, because it's an amazing thing and incredibly important. But the thought was, what if instead of making an online edition, we can make an online platform? Because the thing is, these debates are not stopping. In fact, in the months since the book has come out, they've obviously progressed in really interesting ways. And the publisher, really amazingly, has sort of committed to building this platform with me and to using it to try and track new debates or existing ones as they evolve. So the idea here is that I've commissioned to start 15 new essays for the online edition. And that will be a sort of way in which we'll, first of all, be able to get a little bit more coverage of the field than we had at the beginning. And secondly, that this is going to be an ongoing platform for tracking debates in the digital humanities. And from the publisher's point of view, what we're conceiving of is not just sort of print volume over here and digital volume over here, but rather on the digital side, a kind of ongoing platform where new work is being published, and then out of that sort of pulling possible later editions or volumes. So, for instance, if we were to do a second edition of this, we could use some of these new essays that were written. The publisher at one point floated the idea of like a DH annual or something like that. I don't think I have the stamina for that, but who knows, and so it's kind of exciting to be in that moment and to think through what this new thing could be. So that's sort of what I have. I feel a little badly because I haven't talked specifically around, say, American Studies and digital humanities, and I'd be happy to talk about that as well. But it just seemed to me that the story of the book kind of encapsulated some really essential parts of what DH is right now, and so I thought I would feature that.